Okay, today what we're going to do is finish up Chapter 3. And one of the things that we're going to do with these videos, and this is a good example of one, is some of the videos that we're putting together for this class are not recorded, or were not recorded during the class when it was live. So occasionally, like in this video, you'll see me apparently not talking to anybody in the class. So you'll see that for a few of the videos. I believe this is the first one. There may be 3 more that you will see where it'll just be me in the classroom. But still, we're going to cover the same content as I might have covered in class when I did do the class. Okay, so this is Chapter 3. We're finishing up the section on the brain here at the very end of the outline, looking at left brain versus right brain, and looking specifically at how the right side of the brain perhaps is a little bit different than the left side of the brain in terms of its function and some of the things that we've learned about that. If we take a look at the brain from the top down, you might say, looking from the top down, you would see very clearly, here's an actual photo of the brain, is there are 2 separate halves of the brain. You can even see the dividing line here in the middle that separates the 2 halves of the brain, left hemisphere and right hemisphere. And obviously we're looking at the outer layer, which is the cerebral cortex. So we have 2 hemispheres of the brain, and those hemispheres are connected by a bundle of fibers, nerve fibers called the corpus callosum. So deep inside here in the brain you will see a set of, at least illustrated here with this color red, a set of nerves connecting the left and right hemisphere called the corpus callosum. It serves as a bridge to both sides of the brain, so that activity or input that comes to the left side of the brain can easily get to the right side of the brain if necessary through this bridge called the corpus callosum. A broader term that we use to kind of talk about the 2 halves of the brain is called brain lateralization, which you see there on the just above there, which simply means that you have 2 sides. Think of lateral as, at your side. So 2 sides of the brain. And what we're interested in, at least in this class today, is how the 2 halves of the brain differ. What are the different functions of each half of the brain? All right. So what I'm going to talk about for a couple of minutes here is sort of the traditional view of how we tend to think of left brain versus right brain. You might have even heard that expression, people saying, I'm more of a left brain person, I'm more of a right brain person. So what do they mean by that? What are the functions that traditionally have been associated with the left side of the brain versus the right side of the brain? If we look at this slide here, what you'll see is it's divided into this green half and this blue half. Let's start with looking at the functions traditionally associated with the left hemisphere or the left side of the brain. And those are actually shown on this greenish tab here, or green ribbon here that's around the left side. So the first thing that we see is in the left hemisphere, we see control of movement of, it says their right hand. But what you want to think isn't so much that the left hemisphere only controls the right hand, but the left side of the brain controls all the movement on the right side of the body. All voluntary movement on the right side of the body is controlled through the left hemisphere. And you may recall from a previous class that there's a very specific area in the left hemisphere that controls movement. Movement is controlled through the motor cortex, and the motor cortex is in the frontal lobe. So let me go back a couple of slides where maybe we saw that. Previous slide. Yeah, right here. So here is the motor cortex in the frontal lobe. Now obviously here we're looking at the right hemisphere of the brain, but you have essentially the same pattern in the left side. So it's in the motor cortex, in the frontal lobe, where motor movement, voluntary motor movement, is controlled. But it's the left hemisphere, or the left motor cortex, that controls the movement of the right side of the body. So all voluntary movement, controlled through the left hemisphere. Another thing to keep in mind is that all feeling, all of our sense of touch on the right side of the body is processed in your left hemisphere. So if you feel something in your, let's say you're reaching in your drawer in the morning and it's dark and you're searching for your watch or something, you're feeling around with your right hand and you grab the watch and you know that it's the watch that's in your right hand. That awareness of that watch in your right hand is transferred from your right hand to your left hemisphere. So it's the left side of your brain that actually has the awareness of the sense of touch. And if you recall again from the previous class, that occurs specifically in the parietal lobe in the section called the primary somatosensory cortex. So that strip of brain tissue is responsible for interpreting signals that come through our sense of touch. So it's in the, go forward again. Well, that's not where I want to be. It's in the left hemisphere that we control movement on the right side of the body, and also the left hemisphere that we process our sense of touch on the right side of the body. Okay, what else do we see that's traditionally been allocated to the left hemisphere? Logical thinking abilities, so our ability to think rationally, analytically, considered to be part of left hemisphere. Our language skills, our ability both to speak, speech production, and also our ability to understand, comprehend language is believed to occur in the left hemisphere. From the previous class, let me see if I have that slide somewhere. Let's see, right here. We recall that specifically our ability to produce language occurs or is coordinated through this section of brain tissue in the left frontal lobe called Broca's area. So Broca's area responsible for speech production, whereas Wernicke's area, which is in the parietal lobe, in the temporal lobe on the left hemisphere, that is responsible for language comprehension. So your ability to recognize, to understand what someone is saying to you, that occurs in Wernicke's area. Both of those structures, as depicted in this slide, both of those structures on the left side of the brain, the left hemisphere. So let's see, go back to where we were. All right, so we have logical thinking, we have language skills in the left hemisphere. What else was considered to be part of the left hemisphere? Our writing abilities, and that's not so much pushing a pencil, that's a motor movement, but rather our ability to compose, our ability to use our language skills really in creating writing and in writing composition, grammar, all those things related to writing abilities. And also finally scientific, mathematical skills were considered to be part also of the left hemisphere. Now, in the right hemisphere, we have a different set of abilities that traditionally were viewed to be controlled by the right side. The first one, just the opposite of what we saw in the left hemisphere. In the right hemisphere, we see the control of the movement in the left hand, left side of the body, not just the left hand. So all of our motor movements, voluntary motor movements, are controlled from the right hemisphere to the left side of the body, and our sense of touch on the left side of the body also is processed by our right hemisphere. So just the opposite thing that we saw in the left hemisphere. So right hemisphere controls movement on left side of the body. Right hemisphere is also associated with musical abilities or artistic talents. So those of you who are in the arts and humanities, who are in those kinds of areas, it is believed, has been believed traditionally, that that's a right brain kind of function. What else is in the right hemisphere? Perception of space, or a better term that you might want to note is spatial ability. Spatial ability is not what is depicted in this picture. For some reason, this is a goofy picture. If you can see it on your screen, what it looks like is a girl looking through a telescope looking into outer space. But that's not the correct picture for what this means. Spatial ability has to do with your awareness of location of where things are at relative to one another, where you're at relative to something else. For instance, your sense of direction when you're driving or taking a walk in the woods. That involves spatial ability, awareness of where you are at, positioned in relation to other things. People who are into engineering and who have to do mechanical drawings and who have to think of what an object looks like, or what let's say you're an architect and you are drawing designs of a building. So how does this building look from the north end? How does this building look from the south end? So being able to imagine and to think of how that looks from one end to the other, different perspectives, different views, that's something that requires spatial ability. To be able to mentally sort of imagine and picture what an object might look like from different angles. Imagination, fantasy, considered to be part of the right hemisphere function, as well as body control and awareness. Now, as I've gone through this, one of the things I've been trying to throw in there every time I say it is, this has been the traditional view. So this is what people think of when they say, I'm right-brained. They say they're right-brained because they are into theater, they are into art, versus the person who's the scientist thinks of themselves as left-brained. Someone who really likes math may think of themselves as left-brained. That's the traditional view, but interestingly, research hasn't completely supported that. And there's a couple of reasons for it. The first reason is that most functions, most things that we do not only use one hemisphere or the other. So just about anything that you do doesn't just use the left hemisphere or the right hemisphere. It uses both hemispheres. There's a sharing of information from left side to right side across the corpus callosum, as we described earlier. Take, for instance, the ability to compose music. Let's say you're a musician and you write music. Okay? Now, the way this is set up, the traditional view, it sort of suggests that if you're a musician and you have those kinds of abilities, that's a right brain function. But think about it. If you're writing music, is there any logical thinking that goes with that? Is there an orderly sequence that's involved in the creation of music? Are there mathematical, this is a left brain function also, are there mathematical elements to music? Of course, there's mathematical elements to music. And that math and mathematical abilities is supposedly a left brain function. Okay, so the fact that you are a composer and you're writing music or writing songs, the reality is you're using both hemispheres. You're not just using the right or the left hemisphere. So it's very difficult to be able to look at a specific behavior or talent and to say that's a right brain talent, that's a left brain talent. It just doesn't exist because both halves of the brain work together for just about everything that we do. There are a couple of things, though, that the research does support. And clearly the evidence in terms of studying the brain supports. For instance, it is true that the movement of the right side of the body and our sense of touch on the right side of the body, right hand, right leg, right foot, that is controlled and processed through the left hemisphere. So it is the case that the left hemisphere controls the movement of the right side of the body. And it also is the case that the right hemisphere controls the movement on the left side of the body. Okay, so those things are pretty clear. We have the evidence for that. We can see the patterns in terms of how the neural pathways are set up. The other thing that seems to be pretty clear as well is that language does seem to be primarily in the left side of the brain. So Broca's area is in the left hemisphere. Wernicke's area is in the left hemisphere. Left side of the brain is where language is primarily controlled. One of the interesting findings of stroke patients, people who have some stroke damage to their brain, if the stroke occurs in the left side of the brain, they're much more likely to have language problems as a result of their stroke after the stroke. They're more likely to have language problems if they had the stroke in the left side of the brain. If they had a stroke in the right side of the brain, they're much less likely to have language problems. I mean, either way, you're going to have some difficulties. I mean, people, when they have a stroke, they may have difficulties walking, talking. It really depends on what area of the brain was damaged. But interestingly, left side of the brain, you have a stroke, much greater chance of having language problems. And again, that verifies or confirms the idea that the left side is critical for language. So those are the key areas that where we do see clearly that one side of the brain is responsible for something versus the other side. Okay. The last part of what we need to cover in this chapter is this very interesting line of research that has been historical, but the findings still apply today, and there's still been some recent research in this area even today. And this is in relation to split brain patients. What are people who are called split brain patients? Now, split brain patient is somebody who has had their corpus callosum severed. So this strip of brain tissue that connects left and right hemisphere is no longer connected. It's been cut. Now, why would anybody in their right mind, or left mind, so to speak, why would anybody want their corpus callosum severed? Well, if we look at the next slide here, we can see that this surgical procedure has been applied in the past, not as much anymore, but has been applied in the past to epileptic patients. These are people who suffer from seizures. If you recall from the previous class, that a person, when they're having a seizure, it's like an electrical storm going on in their brain. It's like this uncontrolled firing of neurons. We know there's electrical activity in the brain. It happens all the time. But an excess of activity, a lightning storm, you might say, of electrical activity occurs in the brain when a person has a seizure. The routine way of handling this problem is for people to get some medication. And most of the time, medication is very effective. But there are occasions and situations where a person does not seem to respond to medication. And so, in the past, one of the ideas that came to mind in terms of treating people with epilepsy who were not responding to medication is to sever the corpus callosum. Now, the thinking behind this is that a seizure always starts somewhere. Could start in the left hemisphere, could start in the right hemisphere. Okay? If it starts in the left hemisphere, it starts small, but then it increases, and one of the reasons it increases is because it travels from left to right hemisphere. So the electrical activity spreads, the storm spreads, you might say, and gets larger as it travels across the corpus callosum to the other half of the brain, and then you have an uncontrollable firing of neurons throughout the brain and not just localized in one area. So the thinking was, if we sever the corpus callosum, if we, you might say, close the bridge that connects the left and the right hemisphere, then maybe we can contain the seizure to one hemisphere or the other. If it starts in the left, we can contain it, we can keep it on the left side, and then if it's contained and not as severe, then maybe it'll respond to medication. And that's exactly what's happened. People who have had corpus callosum severed, who suffer from seizures, typically are then able to respond to medication, and their seizures can be reduced or even eliminated. And it occurs, again, because you're limiting the size of the seizure by preventing it from traveling from left hemisphere to right hemisphere. So, seizures become more controllable. Now, that's the reason for why you would do have the surgical procedure done. But what researchers have done over the years is study people with this particular surgical procedure. They've had their corpus callosum severed. And it's sort of shown us some very interesting things that really confirms the idea that you have two halves of the brain, and in fact, they do different things. And sometimes they don't always know. At least in the split brain patient, they don't always know. One side of the brain doesn't necessarily know what the other side of the brain is doing. So let's go through some of that, and you'll better understand what I'm talking about. Um, I need to start, though, by talking about what happens or how visual perception occurs. Okay, how we process visual input, how our brain interprets it and makes sense of it. In this slide, which you can see is, we're looking from the top down, so you can see left hemisphere and right hemisphere. And what we're looking at here is a person who is staring straight ahead at a screen. Okay, let's say they're staring straight ahead at a screen, and they're asked to stare at a point, a dot on the screen. And then what's going to happen is you have a picture that's flashed to either the left side of the screen or the right side of the screen. So let's say, for instance, ignore the flower for a moment. Let's say you flash a picture of a cat to the left side of the screen, which would be considered the left visual field, because when you're looking out there, you have a visual field. How much can you take in with your eyes, even what's included in your periphery. Like I can see my fingers moving even though I'm staring straight ahead. Okay, so you have peripheral vision. So we all have this visual field. So anything left of center is considered our left visual field. So if we flash a picture of a cat to the left visual field, what will happen is that both eyes, in the periphery of both eyes, periphery of the retina, will pick up the image. That information will be sent through the optic nerve, past this crossover structure called the optic chiasm, and it will end up in the right occipital lobe, or the right hemisphere of the brain, in the very back, where vision is processed, as we talked about last time. So, any image that appears in your left visual field, it's the right side of your brain that's going to process it and give you an awareness or an understanding of what it is. And similarly, if you were instead to see something in your right visual field, like this flower, again, both eyes would see it, and then that image eventually is processed in the left hemisphere of the brain, in the left occipital lobe, in the back part of the brain, and that's where you have the awareness of what you've seen. Okay, so similar to that crossover that occurs with our motor movements, you also have the same pattern with visual perception. Anything I see in the left visual field, in my left visual field, is going to be processed and interpreted in my right hemisphere, and anything that's in my right visual field is going to be processed and interpreted in my left hemisphere. Okay, so that's the way vision is processed. Now, that is the way it's processed in a normal person, but that's also the way it's processed in the person who is a split brain patient. So let me kind of show you part of what we're talking about now with the split brain patient. So in the case of the split brain patient, you have, as you can see in the picture, the corpus callosum is severed. Okay, so you do not have this bridge between the left and right hemisphere. But notice that the optic chiasm, the way the structures are set up, the optic chiasm is still intact. So it is still the case that anything you see in the left visual field, here in the blue, is going to be processed in the right hemisphere, and anything you see in the right visual field is processed in the left hemisphere. That is the case also for the split brain patient, as it is for the normal patient. Okay, now here's an interesting thing, though, that you begin to see with the split brain patient. All right, let's say, for instance, the person's staring straight ahead. They're fixating on a dot. Let's say the dot's right here. Okay, so they're fixating. I just mean by that looking at this dot on this blank screen, and then the researcher flashes an image. Let's say an image of a dog. Okay, and we'll say they flash the image of the dog. I'll just write the word dog here. They flash the image of the dog in the right visual field. That information is going to go where in the brain? It will end up in the left occipital lobe. So we'll put it back here, dog. Okay, hopefully you can see that. Okay, so this image of the dog in the right visual field is now going to go to the left hemisphere of the brain. Now, you just flash the picture, so then the image goes away. And then you ask the split brain patient after the image is gone, what did you just see? What was the picture I just showed you? The split brain patient will say, I saw a dog. Okay, and they're right. They saw a dog. Now let's say instead, and just to not confuse the two pages, I'll have a different page here. Let's say instead they're fixating again on a point on the screen, and this time you flash a picture of a cat to the left visual field, left of center. So there's a picture of a cat that's there momentarily, then it goes away. That information, as we know from how this works, the information about the cat, the image, will be processed in the right occipital lobe. Okay, so cat in the left visual field is processed in the right hemisphere, the right occipital lobe. Now here you ask the split brain patient, okay, what did you just see? The split brain patient says, I don't know. Or the split brain patient might say, I didn't see anything. Or they might say, I'm not sure. Or they might just guess. But the point is, they won't be able to respond correctly. Okay? So here, again, just to go back, if you do it this way, flash a picture, right visual field, goes to the left hemisphere, you ask them, okay, what did you just see? They say, I saw a dog. But on the other hand, if you instead flash a picture to the left visual field, goes to the right hemisphere, ask them, what did you just see? They can't respond. They don't know. So what's going on here? Why? I mean, anybody who's not a split brain patient, I'm not a split brain patient, at least no one told me if I was. Anybody who's not a split brain patient would respond either way correctly. They wouldn't have any problem. The split brain patient, though, has a problem doing this one. They do not have a problem doing this one. Okay? Now, what's the reason? Well, let's kind of go back to this one real quick. Okay? You flash the picture to the left visual field, goes to the right hemisphere. Okay, now, when you ask them, tell me, what did you see? You're asking them to respond verbally. In order for them to respond verbally, they are going to use their speech. They are going to use their language. Where is the language? We said earlier the language skills are located in the left hemisphere. So they're actually responding to the question using their left hemisphere. But the problem is that the left hemisphere does not have the information. The information about the cat is in the right hemisphere. So when the left hemisphere is responding to your question, what did you just see? Left hemisphere doesn't know. Left hemisphere doesn't know. The information is in the right visual field, the right hemisphere. Whereas in the first case, when they see the picture of the dog in the right visual field, it goes to the left hemisphere. You ask them, tell me, what did you just see? They can respond correctly. They say dog. Why? Because to verbally respond requires language, which means their left hemisphere is going to be answering. Their left hemisphere has the speech, and their left hemisphere has the answer, which is dog. Okay? So it's a peculiar thing that occurs. And again, the reason is because that information that goes to the left hemisphere stays in the left hemisphere. And in this case, the information that went to the right hemisphere stays in the right hemisphere. Normally it would cross over. The information is shared. But here it doesn't cross over. It stays in the right. That's why when they try to respond with language and they try to talk, to respond, they try to verbally respond, they're not able to because that side does not have the information. The information, you might say, is over here, only over here. All right. Now I'm going to show you some video clips, and I think let's see if I have. Okay, let's look at this slide here first, and then we'll show the video. Here's a different way. This actually will be kind of like what you'll see in the video here in a minute. Excuse me. You have here a person who is looking straight ahead, staring at a fixation point. Okay. You flash the picture of a cup to the right visual field. Okay. By now you know, because I keep repeating it, anything in the right visual field is going to go to the left hemisphere. And then if you were to ask that person, what did you just see? They can say, I saw a cup. And they will be correct. Because the left hemisphere is the talking part of the brain. The left side of the brain speaks and responds verbally. The left side of the brain has the information, because that's where it went originally. But notice here in the second example, there flashed a picture of a spoon. The spoon goes to the left visual field, processed on the right side of the brain. The split brain person is asked, okay, what did you just see? They say, I saw nothing, or they're guessing. Okay? And we said, as we said earlier, the reason they don't know, or I should say the reason they can't respond verbally, is because it's the left side of the brain that has the verbal abilities, but the left side of the brain does not have the spoon. The information about the spoon went to the right side. But then notice what he can do. He reaches around this screen. There's a bunch of objects back there, objects that he cannot see, but he can feel. And so he reaches around with his left hand and he's told, I want you to feel the objects and pick the object that was the object that you saw. Okay? So he reaches around with his left hand, and what does he pick? He picks the spoon. Okay? He can't see it because he's covered by the screen. So he has this, he's able to, with his left hand, pick the correct object he saw, even though he wasn't able to verbally name the object. Now, why is he able to physically pick this object with his left hand correctly? Well, the reason is that his left hand is controlled by which side of his brain? Left hand is controlled by his right hemisphere, and the right hemisphere has the information. The right hemisphere has the spoon. So the right hemisphere can control the left hand to feel around correctly for the object that he's supposed to have, or the object that he saw. Now here's the kicker, and you're going to see this in the video clip. He's got this spoon in his left hand, okay? So he correctly picked the object that he had seen. But then as he's holding it, even though he can't see it, you ask him, what's in your hand? He doesn't know. He guesses. He doesn't know. So he's holding the correct object in his left hand. He's got it there, but he's not able to verbally name it. Why? You know why. Because once you ask him to verbally name it, that's going to kick in his left hemisphere, because that's the part of the brain that talks, that has language, and it's the left hemisphere, unfortunately, that doesn't have the information. The information is in the right hemisphere only. Okay, let me show you a couple of video clips that show these patients being tested. You'll kind of see, hopefully, even more clearly the interesting aspects of this, how the left and the right side of the brain work. In the first video that I'm going to show you, it's going to be a woman, and this is a very old video. It's actually, you'll see in the video Roger Sperry, who is the original researcher in this area, split brain patients. And I think this is at UCLA back in the 60s. And what he's going to do is have the researcher actually has these plastic numbers that she will put into the hand of a split brain patient, and she's going to ask the woman to signal what the number was. Okay, so she'll put a number in her left hand. Let's say it's the number 4, and then she's going to have to signal with her hand, because she can't see any of this. It's all with the screen in between. So she's going to be asked to signal with her left hand what number was. And you'll see they'll put like a 4, I forget the number, but for instance, they'll put a 4 in her hand. You know, she feels it, and then she'll go like this, indicating that it was the number 4. But then when they ask her, what was the number, she says 6. It's real clear that she's just guessing. Okay, so you'll see that. That's part of what we'll see here. Let me see if I can get this correct. What is the to make sure I know the place in. This is actually a video disc 28856. Frame 28856.
Today, at the California Institute of Technology, our housewife is visiting the experimental psychologists. They've been studying the human split brain here since 1961, led by an outstanding brain scientist, Roger Sperry. He observes what happens when the housewife cannot see her hands.
Put your left hand through the screen. Okay, and I'm going to put a number in your hand now. And what I want you to do is signal the answer. So here's the first number. Can you tell me what that number was? 4. Okay. Now let me give you another number.
The housewife feels with her left hand, which means the information goes to the right side of the brain. The right side can't talk, but it can count and it can signal.
Can you tell me again what the number was? 6. Okay, now let me give you another number.
Only the left side of the brain can talk, but it has no idea what these numbers are. It just guesses. Her left brain doesn't know what her left hand's feeling.
Can you tell me what it was? 5.
Nor
So what you're seeing there is she's able to signal with her hand correctly the number that was just put in her hand. So she signaled 7, she signaled 4, she signaled, I forget the first number, 8. So she signals correctly, but then when she's asked to name it, she's guessing. She doesn't know. And again, the reason is because the number is put in her left hand, which goes to the right side of her brain. But then when she's asked to tell the number, she has to use the left side of her brain. The left side doesn't know the number.
This is just an inability to say the right thing. The sense of touch in the two hands is divided. As we'll now see, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing.
Okay. Put your left hand through the screen. I'm going to put an object in your hand now. Feel it. And then I'm going to take it away. And I'll ask you to find it again. Okay? Okay, now see if you can find it. When you find it, hold it up.
The left hand and the right side of the brain know all about the cup.
Now I want you to find the same object with your right hand.
But the right hand and the left side of the brain know nothing about the cup.
Okay, that's pretty interesting, I hope. It's just amazing because it shows again that you really have two different halves of the brain. And one side of the brain knows one thing, the other side doesn't know it, at least doesn't have that information. Again, this is characteristic of people who are split brain patients who are tested in these very specific conditions. You know, one of the things that it's important to remember is when people have this surgery, long term, they don't have problems. It's not like they're wondering, oh, you know, what's in my left hand, what's in my right hand, and that's because the information is always somehow getting from one side of the brain to the other. It's only in these special conditions when you force things to only go to one half or to the other. Usually it takes a couple of weeks, though. What they say is it takes a couple of weeks for people to adjust to having a split brain or having the corpus callosum severed. So within the first few weeks, there sometimes is antagonistic behavior or opposite behavior that occurs. I remember watching this video of a woman who was describing how in the morning she'd go into her closet, excuse me, to get clothes from the closet. And with her left hand she'd reach in and pull one set of clothes, and then with her right hand she'd reach in and pull a different set of clothes, and then she'd put the wrong one she didn't put the one that she wanted on the bed, she put the wrong one down. So there was almost like an opposite or an antagonistic behavior between the two halves of the brain. This is something that occurs in the first few weeks. But then typically people make the adjustment to that, and it does not become a longer-term problem. Let me show you a video clip that you'd also be able to see on YouTube. Sorry. Have it here. The guy who's the researcher here is actually a colleague of Roger Sperry's. His name's Michael Gazzaniga, and so he was one of the students who worked with Sperry in some of the original studies in the 60s. But this also illustrates some of the interesting things that occur when you are able to send information to only one half of the brain or the other. Looks like I'm muted. Shoot.
When it was surgically severed in Joe's brain.
Start it over.
I know the left hemisphere and right hemisphere now are working independent of each other, but you don't notice it. Now you just kind of adapt to it. It doesn't. You don't have any feeling different than it did before.
7 years ago, Joe had brain surgery to allay the effects of severe epilepsy. His surgeon cut the nerve fibers connecting his left hemisphere with his right. While the operation was a complete success, Joe's unusual case offers an extraordinary insight into the machinery of mind.
So it hasn't really made any.
This fiber system, the corpus callosum, is located midway between the two hemispheres. When it was surgically severed in Joe's brain, the transmission of information between the two hemispheres was halted. Michael Gazzaniga.
What we can do is play tricks by putting information into his disconnected, mute, non-talking right hemisphere and watch it produce behaviors. And out of that, we can really see that there is, in fact, a reason to believe that there's all kinds of complex processes going on outside of his conscious awareness of his left half brain. Joe, I'm going to show you some things. I just want you to tell me what you see. And here we go. You ready? Look right at the dot. Okay, right. Okay, you ready? Look right at the dot. Grapes. Good. When Joe focuses on a point, look right at the dot. Everything to the right of the point goes to his left brain, the dominant hemisphere for language and speech. Look right at the dot. So we can see here that when we flash a word or a picture, Joe is easily able to name it. Here we go.
See it?
Close your eyes and let your left hand do a little work here. Okay, what do you got there?
Pan.
Okay, very good. Now, when a word or a picture falls to the left of a fixation point, that information goes to his disconnected right half brain. And as we can see here, Joe is unable to name it. Joe is able to draw the picture with his left hand, the left hand getting its major control from the right half brain. What did you draw?
Okay.
What'd you see?
Wheel on one side. I don't know where I saw on the other.
So even though he can't name it, his left hand is able to draw out the picture of the stimulus of the picture or word that we presented to his right half brain. What did you see?
Saw a hammer.
So just close your eyes and draw with your left hand. Just let it go. Nice. What's that?
Saw?
Yeah. What'd you see?
Hammer?
What'd you draw that for?
I don't know.
What we have with Joe is just a dramatic example of a neurologic case that really allows you this window into the non-conscious and how powerful non-conscious processes are at influencing our conscious self, our personal self. What Joe and patients like him, and there are many of them, teaches us is that the mind is made up of a constellation of independent, semi-independent agents, and that these agents, these processes, can carry on a vast number of activities outside of our conscious awareness. Even though that goes on, there's some final stage or some final system, which I happen to think is in the left hemisphere, that pulls all of this information together into a theory. It has to generate a theory to explain all of these independent elements. And so, and that theory becomes our particular theory of ourself and of the world.
Okay, so you see, again, even very dramatically in his case, the left side of the brain working differently than the right side of the brain. So when he saw, in the one case he saw in his left hemisphere, he saw the saw, the left visual field he saw the saw, right visual field he saw the hammer, okay? He's asked, what did you see? He says hammer. Because what's in the right visual field goes to the left hemisphere, and that's what he's able to verbalize. What's in the left is where he talks. Okay, so he verbalized hammer, but then he's told, okay, I'm going to put this pen in your left hand. I want you to close your eyes and draw a picture of what you saw. Okay, so if he's using his left hand, what controls his left hand? His right hemisphere. What went to his right hemisphere? It was the saw that went to his right hemisphere. So he draws this picture of the saw with his eyes closed. And then actually, I don't recall if they said this in the video, you know, they can ask him, what did you just draw? He doesn't know. I mean, without looking, he doesn't know. And they asked him, you drew a saw. Oh, why did you draw that? I don't know. So again, it's really interesting and fascinating to see the two halves of the brain working independently. Okay, so that covers chapter 3, and until next time, see ya.